And it's interesting just thinking about the last time we spoke, as I say, about the death of Stalin, and just thinking about that there with your job is to make us laugh primarily, really, isn't it? I mean, let's talk about that for a bit, because I believe that you don't particularly label yourself or regard yourself as a satirist, but I think most people here would think Armando Iannucci satirist.
I can understand that, but I never, whenever I hear the word satirist, I kind of imagine someone in black and white doing impressions of Harold Macmillan. That's what I think. That's what I think of. And it's not like I wake up in the morning and go, who shall I satirize today? As if it's just my job to just take someone every day and really give them a good seeing to in a funny, wry way. Really send them up. Really poke a stick at them so that they, it's not that. I think I've always been drawn to comedy, and I see myself as someone who writes funny stuff or makes funny stuff. But I wouldn't say, for example, Alan Partridge, I wouldn't say that was satire, really. I don't know what it is. It's just social commentary. I don't know. Sports commentary. So I've never seen. I can understand, because of things like The Thick of It and Veep and In the Loop, I can understand why people apply that word. And I'm not objecting to it, but it's just not something instinctivly that I see myself as what I do. I see myself as someone who makes funny things, or who makes things that are mostly funny. There was elements of the Death of Stalin which I knew wouldn't be funny. We decided right at the start. I said to the crew and to the cast and everyone, we have to be respectful of what happened. Millions of Russians were killed or were sent away to the gulags and so on. We're not going to make fun of that. The comedy's about the decision, the climate of fear that's going on inside the Kremlin. But the reality of what that behavior produces, we wanted to show for real.
And there's a parallel there, presumably, with The Thick of It, because you're looking at, you're sort of lifting the lid and there's just absurdity there.
Yes, a bit behind closed doors. And the more we research it, because we went out to Moscow and we went around, we went around the Kremlin, we spoke to people who grew up under Stalin. So the more true stories we found, the more absurd they were. We found out that Vasily Stalin's son was over-promoted in the Air Force and was put in charge of the national ice hockey team. And they were going to play a game in Hungary, but there was an ice storm brewing, and all these advisors were saying you can't put them on the plane, and he insisted, and the plane crashed, and he lost the ice hockey team, but he was too afraid to tell his dad. So he just scrambled together friends of friends and called them the national ice hockey team. And they were terrible. They were absolutely, So when we found that out, we put that in the film. We found out all sorts of, it was the climate of fear that was going around. People were too terrified to tell Stalin no.
Yeah, and it's that thing, isn't it? Because I know that a few people were kind of like, no, we can't really laugh at this. This is too desperately tragic. And we know people who were related to people who died, etc. But were there any challenges for you when it came to, because it was based on a French graphic novel, which you guys adapted, but how much were you sort of thinking about the depiction, that sort of balance between, I guess, historical accuracy and making people laugh?
I think it was to do with getting the comedy and the tragedy. I mean, we shot an awful lot of stuff, and I thought it would be the editing process where I'd try and find that balance. So, the shoot itself was, 8 or 9 weeks. The edit was 6 months, because it was about then trying to find the right balance so that the comedy was always there serving the story and the drama was there not diluting the comedy, I suppose. And it was that thing of realizing that, of course, when we go outside, it's for real. When we go inside, it's heightened, kind of mad, terrorized behavior, really. We were told that, people would go to bed at night wearing lots of layers, because if you were pulled out in the middle of the night, taken off to the gulag, if you're wearing lots of layers, then at least you've got lots of clothes to take with you. People would have a bag packed by the door so they could grab it on their way out. And I saw those little I wanted to try and get in the film this kind of an air of sort of not total terror, but just underlying anxiety, which I think was what most people went through on a daily basis. It's not that you could be, heightened terror every day. At some point, a year into it, you get used to it, but there's just always this. Somebody said, I remember somebody telling me, it was after we'd made the film, but somebody was telling me, it was a Russian journalist actually saying, actually, people always thought people were polite under Stalin, because people would always go to, if two of you were going into another room, the other person would always open the door for you, and everyone thought that was polite. It was, no, they didn't want to be the first person to go into the next room.
Yeah.
They wanted to know what was there before they went into the room.
Yeah.
It was things like that.
Doing that research must be a really interesting,
It was,
rewarding part.
and as a result of, going back to what we were saying at the start, being live, I really think when you do a film under normal conditions is you take it out and you show it and you meet people and taking it, around various cinemas and around Europe as well. You meet audience members afterwards. So I met a girl in Rotterdam who'd come over from Belarus. She'd hitched from Belarus to see the film because it was banned in Belarus. I met a guy who'd been to Stalin's funeral. He was only 14 at the time. And he had been caught up in all the disturbances. There was one guy in Los Angeles, of all places, and I thought, I recognise that face. Why do I recognise that face? And he was asking me, he had long hair and a beard and so on. And he was, he was American. He was asking me all sorts of questions about the Politburo and the relationship. And as he got into his car, he waved goodbye and said, oh, by the way, Trotsky was my uncle. And then he just drove off. Well, why didn't you tell me that at the start of the conversation, And I met in Washington, I was asked to speak to 4 elderly ladies who were out in the foyer, and they were all in tears, and I thought, oh God, I'm in trouble now. And they were all Ukrainian, and they were all crying because they said it brought it all back for them. They said, it's true.
Wow.
They said, it's funny and it's true.
Wow.
And that's what so what happened in Russia was you have to get a certificate from the Ministry of Culture. And it got its certificate. So it had a distributor. It was all programmed for the cinemas. And then the night before, I think somebody in the chain of command just thought, I don't want to be shot, and just decided to withdraw the certificate. And then they issued, and it's very Soviet, they issued a letter signed by 100 Russian cultural figures. And it said, this film is of no artistic merit whatsoever. And that was the reason they were withdrawing it. And one cinema still decided to show it in Moscow, and it was raided by the police, which sounds terrible, but what it was the police turned up and just went, what film are you showing? And they said, The Death of Stalin. They went, uh-huh, and then they went away. And I remember the Moscow Times sent a reporter along and asked people as they were coming out what they thought of it. And they said, it's true. And that we wanted to make sure that we wouldn't be accused of manipulating. Obviously, the dialogue and the comic side of it is our invention, but the facts in the film are true. They're based on not just Khrushchev's memoirs, but Svetlana, Stalin's daughter's memoir. They both say this is how Beria behaved at the time. Stalin really did kind of rise up when they thought he was dead and point at a picture of a shepherdess with a goat, and they all tried to work out what that meant. And, they didn't know which doctor to call, because if they got a bad doctor, they might be shot. But then he couldn't be bad if he'd got Stalin well. But Stalin put a lot of doctors on a death list because he was convinced they were trying to poison him.
Wow.
And the soldiers heard him fall over in his room, but they didn't want to knock on the door because they were scared of him, so they just left him all night.
That
just
level
lying.
of detail is incredible, actually, that it exists.
So it's all there,
Wow.
And we just thought there's no need for me to invent stuff here or exaggerate. It is all there.
Tell me about casting, because it's an extraordinary cast in
Yeah.
that film. You know,
Yeah.
Jeffrey Tambor, but you've also got, who else have you got
Steve
there?
Buscemi.
And Paul Whitehouse.
Paul Whitehouse,
So it's
yes.
such an interesting
Michael
combo.
Palin as Molotov,
Yeah.
yes.
So
Yeah.
how involved are you with casting?
Oh, right from the start. And I kind of like to cast kind of one at a time. To build up an ensemble, I don't send all the parts out to different people at once. I kind of want to know who the central figure. I always knew Simon Russell Beale was going to play Beria. And so when I knew it was Simon, I thought, okay, who's going to be good next to Beria? Who's going to be Khrushchev? And I wanted someone really different. And I decided I wanted everyone to play, not to put on Russian accents, but to just do their own voice or do an English dialect. Because the Soviet Union at the time was it was a massive empire. And Khrushchev was from Ukraine, Stalin and Beria were from Georgia, Malenkov was from over the more sort of the Eastern Asian side of it. So it was a real big, even though they all worked together and lived together in these flats that they all had as senior members of the Communist Party, lots of different accents and dialects and languages being spoken. So I thought the best way to get that across is just for everyone to speak English, but in as wide a variety of accents. So I told Steve Buscemi, do it in New York. Do Khrushchev as a New Yorker. It's fine. Simon Russell Beale wanted this kind of slightly guttural kind of like that. Yeah, it's over. It's over. You know that. You know. And I love the idea of Michael Palin playing Molotov, who in reality was this guy who was this is in the film, but it's true, was so convinced that Stalin was right about everything, that Stalin must have been right when he had Molotov's wife arrested. And Beria actually kept Molotov's wife alive because he thought he could use that as a way of getting Molotov on his side once Stalin was dead. But Molotov was convinced that Stalin would have disapproved of his wife being kept alive. It was going against, even though he was happy to see her, but still something must have been wrong because, if Stalin wanted her dead, then why was she alive? But it's lovely to see her, but she should be dead. It's just that crazy kind of logic going on.
And with that cast of really interesting actors, was it liberating for them, or was some of them was kind of like, this is quite an unusual way to do something like this?
What was unusual, I think, is that I kind of like to rehearse. So it's unbelievable. I don't understand why, with big films, people don't rehearse. And so on the day, when you've got 200 people in the crew and money, time is money, you've got your main actor turning up going, I've decided to talk like this, What do you think for Batman? What do you think? and it's too late to go, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. It's because we've got to get film. So I like to have a rehearsal room, just like a church hall or something, away from everyone's away from all the kind of fuss and just almost like we're putting on a play, sit and read it and then work through it in story order for 2 weeks, and that's what we did. And they all really enjoyed it. And it means you can choreograph stuff so that when you're on set, you can do it really quickly because you're not spending the day trying to work out. So there's a scene where they all have to pick up Stalin's body and move it through and put it on the bed and then roll it. And as they roll it, Paul Whitehouse's character ends up with Stalin's sort of urine-soaked trousers landing on his face. And we all worked out who could stand where and when, and therefore at what point he would get stuck and so on. Which you'd spend about 2 hours on set doing if you hadn't done it before,
And presumably with somebody like Paul Whitehouse, particularly, or indeed Michael Palin, I imagine there would be moments there, as you're describing, which wouldn't have happened otherwise, because you're actually working at
and I'm encouraging people to kind of loosen it up and play with it. I think you can just about hear in the final thing, as they pick Stalin's body up, you can hear Paul Whitehouse go, to me. I thought, I'll leave it in, because either you'll hear it or you won't hear it, and there you go.
It's funny.
But I remember Steve Buscemi saying, actually, he really liked it because it's the only time you get to do the thing in the right order. Because when you're filming, you're filming all out of order. You're filming that location. You've only got that location for 3 days. So you've got to do the beginning scene, the end scene, and there. Then you move to another place. You only got that actor for that week. So you've got to do all their scenes in one go. But he said, not only does it give him a chance to work out where his character is in every scene, but also he knows where everyone else's character is in that scene. So that when we do come to shoot it, he knows, what they've been through up till then and so on. He said he found that really helpful.
So it makes sense for everybody, and from a kind of time and economic point of view.
I don't know why it doesn't happen more, really. You do get these people who just fly in and they're there on day one doing their death scene because that's where it's been scheduled.
Which, even if you're a massive star, must be daunting, actually.
Weird. For the Death of Stalin, we did the opening scene and the closing scene in the first day because we had this concert hall. And the film opens with a Mozart piano concerto being played. And again, it's a true story. And it's being broadcast live on Radio Moscow, and Stalin's listening to it and loving it and rings them up and says, can I have a recording? And they realise it hasn't been recorded. It was going out live. And they just panic and they just insist that nobody goes home. And the pianist refuses to do it because she hates Stalin, and they just give her lots of money, which she then donates to kind of charitable causes. The conductor faints because he's just terrified and knocks himself out. So they then scour Moscow for another conductor. And in the film, we get a second conductor who comes in his dressing gown. But in reality, the second conductor was drunk. So in fact, they had to get a third conductor. It turned up in their dressing gown. And they made the recording and then gave it to Stalin. Yeah.
Just extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'm sure many people who are here today, you have to crack open a can. I know. On you go. Like to cover up what's going on stage. I think like many people probably here, particularly within the Loop and other things you've done, I thought, when's Armando going to make a film? Right. So in a way, it was kind of no surprise within the Loop. It was like one could imagine that you were eager to sort of like paint on a bigger canvas.
Yes, no, I've always wanted to make a film, but I never felt, I've always felt I just want to make a film if I feel I have to make this film, rather than, I'm being a filmmaker, what will I make this year? It just depends what the project is. So within the Loop, it was very much, and In the Loop was done in 2000, we probably shot it 2008, so it was released 2009. So it was about 4 or 5 years after the invasion of Iraq. So by then, I knew enough about it to think, okay, what could be a comic take on how Britain and America would conduct themselves as they planned this invasion that had to happen. And again, did research, and I went out to, I went around the Pentagon. I was given a tour of the Pentagon by this Marine who they're trained to walk backwards, so that they talk. I'll see if I can do it now, but they kind of talk to you like this, and they say, "I'm over here," and they know when the elevator's coming, and they step onto the elevator, and they go down the elevator backwards, talking to you, and then they turn, and it's just extraordinary. It looks really weird, and you spend all your time not listening to what they're saying because you're going, "How are they doing? You're going to bang into? Oh no, you're not. Okay." It's weird. So I was taken around the Pentagon. I remember James Gandolfini, who plays General Miller in the Loop, said he did his own research. He would ring the Pentagon up to ring up a 4-star general and say, "Can I take you out for dinner?" And they'd all go, "Yes, it's Tony Soprano. We're going to have dinner with Tony Soprano."
Wow.
And he would ask them questions. And there's a scene where I think Malcolm Tucker says to him, "Have you ever killed anyone?" And so Jim said, when he was taking the generals out, he would ask them, "Have you ever killed anyone?" And he said there was one general who went, "Have I ever killed anyone? Charlie, have I ever killed him?" What's that? Oh, yes, I have. It was just like...
Again, if you were just to write that.
If you write that,
that's ludicrous.
Yeah.
And I wondered, though, there are all of us thinking, you must make a film. But was it, because I think you're an interesting combination of, I think especially when you were younger, a bit shy.
I was quite, well, it was a combination. It's funny that, and I think most comedians said, I was quite shy and bookish, but at the same time, at school I was always the one who did impressions of the teachers and jokes and stuff like that. I listened to a lot of radio comedy, and so I could always joke. And I think being funny was always a useful way of getting along, really, getting through it.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking, and then just the idea though of going from the small screen to the large screen. Was that nerve-wracking for you? And especially with somebody, as you say, you've got James Gandolfini amongst other people.
But it didn't feel it, I think, because by then I'd done stuff like the Day-to-Day and parties. So I was already about 40 or something. I was...
Ancient.
I wasn't a kind of young kind of Turk as a director, really. I came to it quite late. And also because it was a kind of spin-off of The Thick of It, we had Malcolm Tucker in it. You know, so there was an element of known as well as unknown. And I kind of like that. I always like doing the next project should take me a little bit out of my comfort zone. So this was quite good because it was The Thick of It and the team I worked with, but at the same time taking on a whole American cast as well and having to do, as I say, the research that I'd done before for The Thick of It, going out to Washington and doing that research. But I kind of really liked it. I had fun. It was hard. I remember we were filming in Washington outside the White House, and the temperature was like, it was in its 40s. You know, Peter, being Malcolm, he could say one line, and after each take, he had to be like wiped down because it was so hot, you know, it's hard. I've never experienced anything like that filming in the UK.
No.
I have to say. That sort of thing. It felt like I was ready to do it, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's maybe a bit like what you were saying earlier on about, you know, if it's time to make a film. So it strikes me that you're somebody who, you know, if the project is right, and it's also like if the time is right, and presumably you've got a good team around you,
yes.
and there's a heck of a lot of organisation with any film, but you're very clear about how your approach.
Yes, and it's very different from doing a TV show. You sort of are still working it out as you're making it. You know, you've got the first episode, but you get an idea. You think, well, that'd be quite good for episode 5 or something like that. And with a TV show, each episode sort of has to end roughly where it began, so that you can do the next episode. With a film, you don't have a second go at it. You know, you don't pilot the film. You don't have so you've got to get it right first time. So you've got to have the whole story mapped out and first time, and the casting has to be right, and the look of it has to be right, because you don't get a second go at it. Now, that still doesn't mean that you don't have a chance to come up with new stuff as you go along. I think there's one line that people quote from In the Loop, which is when Chris Addison's character says, it won't be easy peasy lemon squeezy, it'll be difficult, difficult, lemon difficult. Now, that wasn't in the script. That was a line we came up with on the day. At the end of the day, because we couldn't think of something funny. Whatever the you know, easy peasy lemon squeezy was there. But we couldn't think of you know, the joke, as it were, the punchline to it. And I remember there was like a journalist was on set that day, so there was extra pressure because they were kind of staring at us as we were getting in the corner. And then we came up with you know, difficult, difficult, lemon, difficult. Thinking, I don't know, let's give it a go. You know, and there it was. You know.
And you talked about how, you know, you were maybe the boy in the class who would do impersonations of people and make people laugh. But I also wondered, given that you went to St Aloysius College round the corner, if you came here much to see films.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I remember coming to see, I think Derek Jarman's Tempest had just come out. I went to see that. We came here, I remember as a few of us skipped our maths A-level class to come and see Felicity Kendall talk about filming Shakespeare. All right. And I think we had, officially we said it's for English, but I think it was really just we wanted to see Felicity Kendall, really. But no, it was good to, and yeah, the school's just around the corner, so as a sort of kind of end of day thing, as a 6 o'clock thing or something. And so I'm quite a regular here.
Well, it's another aspect of you I think is interesting is the Jesuit education, because, you know, that's not really cool, is it? But I've never thought of you as being one of the cool kids. But in a way, in the end, I'm bobbing around here in different ways. But, for example, there was a quote in the paper the other day comparing you guys in comedy as being like the kind of the Britpop, comparing you to Britpop. I was thinking that must be sort of like your Room 101 to be part of Britpop. but
well, I laugh in that, you know, those who knew me at school, I was never cool. I was never a kind of, you know, I was into Beethoven and Mahler. Nothing written after 1900. You know, I read Dickens novels, and so I was not cool. But then I wasn't interested in. That's the thing. I didn't beat myself up for being uncool. I just thought I'm really not interested in what label you have. You know, I'm not interested in defining people by a certain category, really.
Yeah.
I think that's easy. And I think what's interesting, what makes for a good story is actually, usually the best stories are about people you think you know what they're going to be like, and then they turn out to be completely different from how you expected.
Yeah.
You know, you could be a comedian, but on the other hand, you could lead your country against Vladimir Putin. Those are interesting stories, and I find that much more fascinating than these are the goodies and these are the baddies.
Yeah.
And I suppose a lot of things like The Thick of It and so on are really about, they're politicians, but they're human, and this is what makes it work, and this is what makes it, all fall apart. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
Rather than, that's the nasty one, and this is the kind of the poor victim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is interesting, without doing a psychiatrist couch thing, but it's that combination in you, I think, which is, you've described for other people, they might have ended up sort of beating themselves up a bit about not being one of the so-called cool kids. But we talked about maybe being a little bit shy back then, but also having that sense of self and
I think so. And my memory also of, I mean, you say it was Jesuit education, but there weren't that many Jesuit teachers. It was, it was lay teachers. But the Jesuit teachers we did have were actually quite encouraged inquiry. They encouraged questions. They wanted debate, and they wanted you to question. Because if you don't question something, you haven't worked it out then. Whatever your beliefs are have to be challenged. And, my concern now is the way we've kind of all retreated into only wanting to talk to people who agree with us.
Yeah.
Because that way you don't test your belief. It's far better to at least converse with someone who has a different point of view so you can see where it is you disagree. You might not get them to agree with you, but at least in being able to defend your own ideas and beliefs, you get a better, I often get asked, is it difficult writing comedy because people might get offended by something? And I say, yes, but what's wrong with being offended? I'm not saying it's right to always offend people, but what is the issue with being offended? If you can't take a joke, then there must be something about your set of beliefs that hasn't been used to the challenge. And I think it's important that you continually challenge. Look, one of the reasons I made The Death of Stalin was I was worried about the likes of Putin and Berlusconi in Italy, Erdogan in Turkey. This was before Donald Trump came along. We were making it about the fact that democracy actually is not forever. It's not something that once it starts, it will just carry on forever unless we do something about it. And it's about continually asking ourselves, what is democracy? How does it work? What do we want from it? How do we make that happen? How do we keep making that happen? It's about continually, refreshing it and redefending it and redefining it. Because if we don't, then it stagnates, and then this is what happens.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, in the area of social media, which can be wonderful and helpful in many ways, but that's where we really see what you're describing there, is that sort of taking offence at everything. It's like, why can't you just have a discussion about it? But that's
right.
not the place to do it, clearly.
Yeah. No, you can't. No,
wrong forum.
Yeah.
Can we talk a wee bit about your family, actually? Because I don't know too much about your family, but I did a little bit of research. Cause I thought, I've not really heard people talking to you about it much. Your dad was born in Naples, came over around about 1950, and when he was a teenager, he'd worked in an anti-fascist newspaper, and when the war broke out, he took to the hills, had to do so, to join the partisans. Excuse me? Amazing. And did he talk to you and the family about that?
No, I must have this conversation with my elder brother who's in here about it later, because no, he died when I was about 16, 17. Yeah. I do remember when The World at War was on, and the episode about the concentration camps came on, and he got up and he said, I can't watch this, but you must watch this. And I think it's because, the memories of the time were just so traumatic. And it's odd because I always saw him as part of a generation who've had to make decisions that we would never have to deal with. That's history. Yeah. And yet here we are. We're seeing it again. There's people in Ukraine who one day are working in a library or a school, and the next day are having to decide what they do. Do they, put their family on a train? Do they stay? What do they do?
Yeah.
And it's just shocking to kind of think that sort of level of, I remember going to, it was after apartheid had ended in South Africa. I'd going to see, my wife has relatives in Pretoria, going out to South Africa and watching an Afrikaans comedian called Peter Dirk Ace. And he was like the thorn in the side of Botha and all, because he did impressions of all the politicians. He did, as well as Mandela and but Botha particularly, And I remember going to see his show when, democracy and apartheid was over and democracy had come, thinking, I'm watching someone who maybe 10 years ago, if he'd said that joke, might have been put in prison, And I think we take that freedom for granted, that we can say things and not worry about it, So it's shocking to think that that's actually not that long ago and now not that far away.
Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it? You think that society will continue and civilization to progress.
We'll just get better and better, as we can all see.
Of course,
with,
of course.
But
I did wonder,
driverless cars and
exactly.
Yeah.
I did wonder how much as well, because you work at a fair pace. It would seem you are very prolific. Maybe it doesn't always seem that way to you, but certainly in terms of your output. And I wondered whether there was anything from that kind of Scottish-Italian background of a work ethic, actually, that has come through to you.
Well, I suppose I think any immigrant community will say it's that next generation. It's the parents who work hard so that their kids don't have to work as hard and can, don't have to feel that they're missing something. There's that. I think any immigrant community would tell you that. When I grew up, I think the Italian community was actually very prevalent in Glasgow. And I think also just the value of education, value of learning. I don't know also whether, for me particularly, being Italian in Scotland and then a Scot in England and then a Brit in America for a while. I've always been slightly one foot in, one foot out.
Is that useful, actually? Do you quite like that?
I don't know if I like it, but it's just something I noticed that has been, but maybe it's my personality as well, I don't know, but I've often felt the ability to stand to one side and watch it for a bit and then step back in and join in, So if I went to like a Cayley, I'd think, this is extraordinary, what is this? But then if I went to an Italian wedding, I'd think, this is extraordinary, what is, it's that mix, really.
And the thing is, you're not a sole operator. I think it's really interesting too, because in terms of your psychology, sorry if I'm going shrinky, but I don't mean to be, but just that idea of you enjoy the creation, you enjoy the teamwork in terms of working with other writers, comedians and so on.
It's partly displacement activity, because as a writer on your own, it's dreadful. I mean, it's really hard and slow, and there's so many distractions now and whatever. And I find if you are able to sit in a room with 3 or 4 like-minded people and just make each other laugh, but then bounce ideas off each other, the ideas you emerge with are usually ones that would have taken you on your own months to get to. Just the speed in which you can kind of like keep developing ideas.
Yeah.
It's good.
And I'm going back to you studying philosophy and English Lit at Glasgow Uni, and then you continued your English Lit studies at Oxford. And I think you enjoyed your time there, didn't you, at Oxford?
I loved it, yes. I stayed on to try and write a thesis on Paradise Lost, which I stopped after 3 years when I realised that the opening lines to Paradise Lost of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree have the same rhythm scheme to the theme tune to the Flintstones, which is of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree. And I was doing lots of comedy then, and I thought, do you know what? I think I'm tending more towards the comic direction than the academic.
No, I wondered
side.
about that, because you did comedy early doors, didn't you, at Radio Scotland?
Yes.
including The Archie McPherson Show. That's such a good title. Yeah. But there are people here born so much after us that have got no idea who Archie McPherson is.
Know who Archie McPherson?
A legend.
He was a football commentator. You know football, okay? Commentary on football. So that was in Radio Scotland. Radio Scotland were looking for they were trying to change their image. They were looking for a young, hip audience. Here I am. And I sent them a kind of comic tape of my stuff. Andy Cameron, Andy Cameron? Yeah? Yes. He was in a debate. I was a postgraduate at Oxford and I was asked to take part in a debate, a funny debate about Scotland is funnier than England. So there was an England team and a Scotland team. So I was on the same team as Andy Cameron. He was very funny and I did my bit and he passed my name on he said, look, Radio Scotland are looking for young, funny people. Yeah. So I sent the tape up and came back and did a funny show with the likes of Eddie Mair and stuff. Yeah.
And you've got a sort of posse at that point, and you still keep in touch with them?
Well, we're meeting up tomorrow afternoon.
What's happening?
It's a secret location where the drinks are going to start flowing at 2:30 p.m. until 4 p.m. Because I have a book event at 5 p.m. No, we still keep in touch. Yeah.
No, that's good. Yeah. And it still seems to be true, even all these years later, that radio is just a great test bed, actually, particularly for comedy, isn't it?
I mean, the thing that inspired me was listening to things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which, came on for the first time as I was growing up listening to radio, and just this, I was going to say eye-opening, but sort of mind-opening experience of realizing comedy wasn't just about jokes, it was about ideas and narrative, and I found that really inspirational. Yeah. And
then you went off to London, and that's what I was talking about comedians, just a list of some of the names here. You did your own show with Radio 1 involving comedians you've worked with for years and years. It's lovely, actually. Steve Coogan, who you may have heard of, David Schneider, Peter Bainham, Rebecca Front, and more. Did you have a plan at that point? Again, thinking about you, were you like, I'm going to do this thing, and they need a shake-up, and I'm going to provide it?
No, I just wanted to do new stuff, and I kind of felt at the time there was lots of slightly conventional sounding stuff that, there were two types of comedy. It was either sitcom or sketches. And I thought, actually, is there not more? Can we not play with the form now? Aren't we getting a bit more kind of wise to how the medium sounds and so on? I remember when I arrived in London to start my job, listening to a show on Capital, London's commercial station, called The Way It Is, and it was a news programme, and it was called The Way It Is, and it had a jingle for everything, and it was bang, bang, the economy. And for 30 minutes, just headache. And I thought, that's really funny. And then I was sent on a course by the BBC, a production course, to learn how to make stuff. And I was on with other journalists and news producers. And we had a project which was to make a magazine show. And I thought, well, I want to make a comedy show. I don't want to make a magazine show. So I thought, I'll make a false one. I'll make a fake one. I'll use the news reporter to sound like a news reporter, but I'll just invent bollocks, So we invented a story about Britain's first three-way boxing match and stuff like that, And he said it very authoritatively, and I gave that in at the end of the week, and they said, oh, this is a show. And it became On the Hour, and I got in touch with Steve Coogan, who was doing impressions, doing spitting image stuff. I had this guy on the radio called Chris Morris, who was doing fake DJ stuff and stuff. I just got in touch with them and got them together and said, why don't we make a show that sounds like the news, but isn't? Just allows us to tell jokes, but in a really straight way, like that. And it kind of took off, really. And that's where Alan Partridge developed. As I said, we need a sports reporter, a generic kind of... and it's so funny, because when Steve started, he said, what, a bit like this, something like this. And we all started laughing, and instantly, we can never remember who said what, but one person went, he's Alan. And someone else said, and he's a partridge. And we just had this idea of him being a little bit kind of, like at the time on the Today programme, when they did the sports at 25 past, there used to be a little cheeky kind of relaxed conversation between the sports reporter and John Humphreys. And you could tell that John Humphreys looked down on the sports reporter as not really a journalist. And I thought, well, that would be Alan. Alan would be just going, in his head, going, they're all laughing at me, but I'll show them. And so Alan sort of emerged kind of already talking. I mean, we knew as soon as he opened his mouth and spoke like Alan, that a new person was in the room, who would be with us for some time.
Well, that's it. I mean, I so enjoyed Alan in the Oast House. I just thought that was also genius.
Yes, yeah.
And Alan Partridge goes on, and each manifestation is brilliant. I mean, can you figure out what the hell's going on? Why?
I think it's because we didn't overdo it. Do you know what I mean? We kind of take him out of his box every 4 years. And by which time, the media has developed in 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's whenever Steve and I would meet up, at any time, we'd always imagine what Alan's up to anyway. So I'm sorry we never did this. I had the idea that at one point he was doing a tour, London, sort of Norwich tours on an open-top double-decker bus. But it would come round to a street where he owed lots of people money, so he would divert the bus to just an industrial estate. And this was here since Henry VIII's time, just inventing stuff about this. We never did it. But we would always speculate as to what Alan... So he was always there was always a running Alan life going on in the background. And Alan was always 10 years older than Steve. So when Steve started doing it, Steve was 30, Alan was 40. And Steve still looked like a little boy when he was first doing Alan. I remember him saying, I can't wait till I'm middle-aged. So he could do Alan properly. And I think we've just allowed him to grow as we've grown, really. So
and he's kind of odd combination, isn't he? Of quite monstrous and at the same time utterly pathetic.
But he's always well-meaning, He's he wants to do well, but he wants other people to do well, and he doesn't quite. A lot of people say they always know someone like Alan. Uh-huh. No one's ever come up to me and said, "Oh, that's so me." But they always work with someone, or their uncle is a bit like Alan, or the guy down the road is a bit like Alan,
Tell us, just because I'm nosy, what's it like working with Chris Morris? What was the dynamic like early on?
Oh, it was instant, and funnily enough, he grew up at Jesuit school as well in England. In fact, we found out with one or two of our teachers had kind of taught both of us. He was a year older than me. We met outside Broadcasting House. So I just wrote to him, said, I want to do this fake show. And he arrived in this tatty old car, this second-hand car. It was falling apart, but he couldn't find anywhere to park, so I just got in the car. We literally drove round the BBC for 2 hours, coming up with only... And it seemed kind of opposite that, we would circle around the BBC, coming up with our show. But he's like me, he started off... fascinated by comedy, but not a comedian. He started off in local radio in Cambridge and then Bristol as a presenter, and then just mucking about and trying stuff out and doing different voices and stuff, which is what I did when I was at Radio Scotland.
Yeah.
So we had and grown up listening to the same things like Hitchhiker's Guide on the radio and so on. So we had very similar mentalities in terms of our approach to comedy, and wanted to write stuff that felt like it wasn't a comedian just standing up and saying lots of jokes.
And again, it's that thing of actually the physical editing and splicing and all of that he really enjoyed.
That's right, yes. And we did a lot of that. I mean, in our day, you physically,
back in the old days,
physically cut the tape to edit it with a razor. I mean, it was barbaric. And bits would fall on the floor and, I remember the very first, when I joined as a producer, the very first show I did was the news quiz, producing it. And, you record it on the Thursday night and you spend all the Friday editing it with the editor. And so there's this one, and there isn't a copy. So you've got this one piece of tape that's got 100 bits of it stuck together with tape. And the show goes out at 6:30, and I'd finish at 5. And I went and I said, "What do you do with it?" "Oh, you take it down to the Graham library, the tape library, the BBC." "Okay." It was shut. And I know what I do. And there's a sign saying, "If closed, pop through letterbox." So I just put the program in the letterbox. And it was a glass door, and I just saw it fall onto the floor. And I thought, I'm going home, because I need to know that this has gone out.
Yeah.
And I dashed home, switched it on, and there it was going out. So just this little kind of pathetic bit of tatty tape all stuck together with chewing gum and spit.
That must have been exciting, though.
That was quite nerve-wracking, yes.
But the end result.
But no, what I like about radio is the immediacy of it, the fact you could do it and then it goes out and you're done. Really.
Yeah. I guess maybe there's an equivalent now with podcasting or something like that.
Yeah.
Just thinking of the huge success of The Thick of It, and I can imagine people thinking, oh, we need a kind of, I miss The Thick of It. Can we have The Thick of It for now? But that's a problem, isn't it?
Well, what's the joke?
Yeah.
And also, I mean, The Thick of It was done at a time when there were some rules as to how politics was conducted, and each episode would show how some of those rules were kind of very gently broken or bent and, twisted. But, like Trump said, he literally said, I could shoot a guy in the face in Fifth Avenue and still get elected. He said that before he was elected. He said that. Boris Johnson, he got someone to stand up in Parliament and say, we are breaking international law, but only in a very specific way. So there are no rules anymore.
Yeah.
There are no rules, because, the Prime Minister decides what the rules are and selects the person who judges on whether he's broken the rules and then decides whether to publish the report that will say whether or not he's broken the rules. There are no rules. So what do you do? Mm-hmm. I think a show that shows people gently trying to get round things in a clever way would just seem like some kind of black and white show from the 1950s with Harold Macmillan. I think we're just in a different... I think the comics who do have some success tackling what's going on now are the ones who have more of a journalistic bent to them, like John Oliver, who has like a whole team of researchers and is able to trawl through the archives and say, okay, well, they said this, but 3 years ago they said this, and this is how this, so has a kind of an argument with bits of evidence, So
or someone like Mark Steele.
Exactly, yeah. So there's a point of view, there's an argument there. I think that's more kind of what's needed at the moment.
But that is through the looking glass, isn't it? Because that's the thing, you think about Trump, don't even like to say his name, and Boris Johnson, and certainly Trump emerges from reality television and all, his corrupt business dealings and all of that. He's a TV star.
But Johnson also is an entertainer. He not just the have I got news for you thing, but his persona is very much someone who's constructed this persona for public consumption, for public amusement and entertainment, and it's reassuring, isn't it? Because he's so dopey and he's so kind of like, he's harmless, isn't he? Really, that kind of effect. But it's calculated. So politicians have become the comedians, and so the comedians have to become the journalists, or indeed become the politicians, as in the case of Ukraine. So it's all good. Yes, Donald Trump is a self-basting satirist. That's what he is, really, because he is his own joke. He is his own joke.
I was thinking back to when you did Time Trumpet in 2006. So that was set in 2031.
Okay, we're getting near it. Yeah.
A nostalgia show looking back at the first 30 years of the 21st century. Now, I can't remember with Time Trumpet, but was there anything that you kind of made up that was anywhere near the reality, given that, as you say, then Trump appeared?
Yes.
Presumably you couldn't have been imagining that.
Well, I think we had a very modified, the BNP had kind of like tried to go through a kind of a change to try and market themselves as much more kind of right-wing but much more pleasant. I think we did that on Time Trumpet, and this was before Farage and Co came along. So there was elements of that. And we did do David Cameron disappearing after some terrible thing had happened. We did do that. And it was never specified what it was. But everyone talked about, oh, yes, he was never seen again. And that strangely has come true as well, just not spoken about. Just at one point somebody says, nothing will grow on that land. you know. Nobody knows what it was, but it was just some unspecified thing that brought an end to David Cameron. Yeah.
Love it, love it.
So, here you go. Yeah.
Can we talk about Veep briefly?
Okay,
Because,
yeah.
Veep, can we do an Oprah Winfrey? Yeah, come on.
And I think also we're going to be taking questions as well, is that right?
Yeah, we're going to do questions. We're going to do questions as well. But Veep, so that you were showrunner for 4 series of that with HBO.
Yeah.
Was that what was it like working in that kind of different landscape?
Well, I got the kind of the first taste of it doing In the Loop, and in fact Anna Klumsky, who was in the Loop, was in Veep. I mean, it's a much bigger stage, not just because the role that you're portraying is the vice president who then becomes the president. So, in the thick of it, the things the minister does don't have many public consequences, because they're in a kind of small department. This is the president, so what they do does matter. So there's that. But also, because of that, you're working with a bigger team. Mm-hmm. One episode of Veep I worked out cost something like 2 seasons of the thick of it, just because of the kind of sheer resources, not just the cast, but if the president comes into a room, there are 1,000 people there. Mm-hmm. There are cameras there, there's security, and you've got to show all that. Yeah. So it's a bigger beast to kind of manage. But I think by that stage I kind of got into it, and we shot it actually in Baltimore, which is on the East Coast, but within 30 minutes journey from Washington. Mm-hmm. So we could use the exteriors for Washington as well. We shot it in a big hangar in Baltimore. But it was so funny, because again, we did our research and we went round, and I was shown around the West Wing by Reggie Love, who was Obama's kind of body man. They're called basically the person who just says, here's your schedule for the day. That's the person you're speaking to there. The one who whispers in his ear and says, it's his 50th birthday today, you might want to say happy birthday, and all that sort of thing. And it was so funny because they're obsessed with television versions of themselves. So Reggie Love would show me around the West Wing, and he'd say, this is the Roosevelt office, this would be where CJ and Josh would discuss. And I'm saying, you're referencing West Wing characters, but you're it. Why don't you say, this is where Barack Obama would talk to Secretary Clinton about Angela Merkel? But they didn't see it that way. They saw it as like, it's always more interesting what you're doing than what we're doing. You're in the White House. But it was really interesting. It was a real eye-opener because it's quite a warren. It's tiny, lots of tiny little corridors crammed with people because everyone wants to say when they go home, I work in the West Wing. They could have a bigger suite of offices in some other building, just 500 yards, but they want to work. And I remember seeing a 4-star general in a corridor on a tiny stool like that with a laptop and a briefcase on his knees like that. That was his office because he wanted to say he had a room in the White House in the West Wing.
Fantastic.
And I just thought, and it's finding out things like that that thing of the buildings from outside. Everyone looks like they know what they're doing, but once you go inside, you realise, no, they don't. Yeah. It's like any place of work, Some people are better than others, and I found this out when we were doing In the Loop, research for In the Loop. Donald Rumsfeld was talking about. He was recruiting people for when America invaded and took over Iraq and put another government in place. He needed people on the ground, and he would recruit people, and he'd ask them if they spoke Arabic. And if they said yes, he said, well, that shows you have pro-Arab tendencies, so we don't want you. So the initial stages of the American operation in Iraq was full of people who didn't understand the language, which sounds funny, except, I don't know if you remember, the early days of that, there were whole instances of families in cars at checkpoints being told to stop and just driving forward. And then being shot for being potentially, suicide. And that was because nobody told them that in Iraq, that means come forward. So the Marines were going to go like that, and the people were going, because they hadn't. And it's things like that. It's this whole thing about, is it a conspiracy or is it a cock-up? Yeah. It's sort of both, It's the mindset determines how you're going to make decisions. And then those decisions are badly made. And then you end up with a mess.
Thanks for the reassurance.
Thank you very much. I met a guy from the CIA who said he spent 4 years at a desk in the CIA, and he just always felt someone was going to tap him on the shoulder and say, you know, the room with the big screens and the monitoring and everything, it's through there. Do you want to come and have a look? He said it never happened. Never happened.
Yeah.
And he said they got more intelligence on the ground in Iraq from the Baghdad newspapers than they did from their own operatives. Baghdad newspapers were far more accurate telling them what was going on.
Oh, Armando, it's fascinating.
And it's all because, you know, this 45-minute clip, it's because they were paying money to people to tell them what they wanted to hear. So they would say, oh yeah, he can send you a missile in 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. Great, here's some money.
Yeah.
And that was it, you know.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Now, audience questions. I'm sure you get hundreds. Oh, lady at the back, hand up immediately. And we have our gentleman here.
It's a big build-up to the question, isn't it?
And they've cleaned the mic as well. They know who I am. So normally I would ask a filmmaker what your next project was going to be, but I feel it's more prevalent to ask if you're thinking of kicking Boris Johnson off his post and taking Peter Capaldi with you down to become the PM.
Oh, right. Well, it'd have to be some kind of revolution for that to happen, I think. See, I would never work as a politician because the thing I wouldn't be able to do is like stick by the party line. All these poor ministers who had to go on the news saying, no, it wasn't a party, it was a business. When you could see inside, they were screaming and crying, just thinking, why am I saying this? Is you know, that's the bit I would never be able to cope with. So I'd just be the annoying backbencher who. So I don't think I'd exist that sort of time.
Thank you. You have another?
In a final episode, second final episode of The Thick of It, there's an inquiry episode. Mm-hmm. How early in production did that come about, and how, in terms of filming, comparing it to the rest of the series, how was it? It
was very different, the inquiry episode. It was an hour long, and I shot it in 2 days. It was, the way we did it was, because a lot of The Thick of It, like I explained, we meet for rehearsals, and we work in the rehearsals, and then we go in, and we try and shoot it very fast, but, there is a script and stuff. With the inquiry episode, and the whole season had been building up to it, I said to the cast, we're not going to rehearse any of it. I'm going to give you your script. You'll be allowed to see what has been said already in the inquiry, but you won't see what comes after you in the inquiry. You won't meet the people who are asking you the questions. The first time you see the set, it will be as you come into the room with all the cameras and all the people there, and you will sit down and you will answer the questions. And that was really to get them all kind of, because I suppose The Thick of It is all about people, what they really like, in their offices. This is them now having to kind of do their public bit. So the fun is in knowing what they're like, realizing what I was saying, that nightmare going on in their head as they're saying one thing, well, you know that they believe the opposite. So it was all about that, and them genuinely not knowing. I mean, obviously they knew what was going to be asked because they had time to see the script. And to try and keep it spontaneous, I said, don't memorize it, because an inquiry is such, you can have lots of documents about. So we had the scripts all there so that, as a question was they could look down and remember the next thing. So we did it like that, and we shot it in 2 days. We shot, an hour episode in, because it was just the one location. And I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it, yeah. And when Malcolm is finally nailed, but on camera, I mean, Peter does this amazing kind of collapse, and yet still trying to maintain his kind of, his persona, while at the same time inside thinking, I want to run away. How do I get out of this? That was fun. And then we did something similar for Veep. It was the last thing I shot for Veep. It was a congressional hearing. And again, it was putting them all, and this time, it was like in front of Congress. So the cast had to come in, and there was like thousands of press and crowds and people staring at them. And again, they hadn't met any of the senators asking the questions and stuff. Basically, it was to try and make them as uncomfortable as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great question. Thank you very much for that. And just quickly, that reminds me, you are not a swearer, but you have created Malcolm Tucker.
No, I'm not swearing. I mean, I'm not against swearing.
You don't,
but I'm not,
usually.
I don't kind of, if I stub my toe, I'd probably say something. But I'm not a kind of, it's just, it's all to do with the research. It's when we were researching how Whitehall worked, and this was the sort of tail end of Blair Brown and so on. It was a very macho, testosterone-fueled, high-pressure kind of, almost like you had to show that you were on top of it by swearing kind of thing.
Yeah.
But just saying, the F word again and again and again isn't necessarily that interesting. So it was all about trying to improve the F word.
We can all hear those words and expressions.
To the extent that people still send me, quilts with "come the fuck in" or "fuck the fuck off," written, embroidered on it and stuff.
I love
like
it.
that,
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question, yes.
Thank you very much for a really interesting discussion. I was just going to ask, you said about working with him earlier, but what was it like to work with James Gandolfini, and if you had any more interesting stories about working with him?
Well, he was a delight. He was lovely. I mean, he was an actor. He wasn't Tony Soprano. He was this very genial, amiable, funny. I remember him telling me he was a big fan of W.C. Fields, and he wanted to do a biopic about W.C. Fields. He just loved that kind of big guy who yet is kind of gentle at the same time. Except I remember when we finished In the Loop, we were filming outside the UN, so we were all in New York. So for the next night, we're all going to meet at this place, a steakhouse in Brooklyn, that apparently you have to book months in advance, but we managed to get 20 of us in. But it split us all up. And then when Jim came in and saw us all split up, he went, "No, we've all got to be together here." And so he just went over to people, just couples, and they would look up. Because there was Tony Soprano going, "Do you mind moving? Because I want all my people here. You got to go. And they were, and they all moved, and the staff put all the tables together, and he sat down and he says, "Every now and then it helps."
Thank you. Great question.
Right.
Hi, Armando. So, see if you were in your early 20s, anonymous, and you were trying to make either a movie or a TV show today, would you take the same approach you made back in the day when you were starting out, or would you make something different? And I'm not here to steer your ideas or anything, I'm just asking.
No, I don't know, really. The landscape has changed so much, because on the one hand, at the time, I suppose, in terms of comedy, it was just the BBC and Channel 4. Now it's, you can make it yourself to start with. But also there's such a demand all around now. So that's, and it's easier. It's easier to make stuff, isn't it? It's easier to buy the equipment and go out and film it yourself and do it. So that's the good thing. I suppose the downside is it's so easy that there's just loads of it out there now. So it's how do you get heard above that? And I don't have an answer to that. I just always say to people, write what makes you laugh, not what you think will make the commissioning editor of such and such laugh, because you've got to write your best stuff, and your best stuff will be the stuff that makes you and your friends laugh. And also keep making it, but even if you think it's terrible, then ask yourself, why is it terrible? Because then you learn from it. So with each fresh thing you make, the better you get, But whether I would make, I don't know, I'd probably look at social media now as a starting point and do something. I don't know. At the time, I suppose this authoritative voice of news was beating a lot, so it seemed like a good area to look at.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Clockwork Orange.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Gentleman there with a nice red mask on.
You mentioned earlier about your casting process and finding the right actor for the central character.
Uh-huh.
If you were to make a film about Donald Trump, which actor would you like to play that role?
Well, here's the thing. I see. Everyone. Brendan Gleeson has been mentioned to me a few times. I came up with this idea. I was bored. I think I was stuck somewhere, and I just tweeted, idea for a movie. This was while Trump was president. An alternative White House is built, and Trump is put on that and is convinced he's governing, whereas in fact he's not. At great expense, a Senate is built that he thinks is voting for his stuff, And at the end of the day, I had 12 offers from different studios, and that's how desperate they were. And I did actually speak to, I thought, well, no, it was a joke. I don't want to spend a year and a half in the company of Donald Trump in my head. And they talked about Brendan Gleeson playing. I thought, no, if I was making that film, I'd actually use footage of Donald Trump. I'd cast everyone else, but I'd have Donald Trump. I'd just cut in footage of, because I think any attempt to do him would disappoint, I think, because it wouldn't be him, you know. You can't, how can you can certainly improve him, but you can't capture the full monstrous life force that is him, I suppose. I think it's beyond any actor. You would have to have a team of actors, I think, in a Donald Trump costume. Like a pantomime donkey or something, you know. Someone playing the top half of Trump and someone playing the bottom half of Trump. You know, so I thought actually that was my approach. You know, when we were actually got a bit further into discussing it as a possibility. But in the end, I thought I really don't want to spend 18 months looking at shots of Donald Trump. I really don't. You know.
I think we've got time for one last quick question.
I just wanted to ask about the relationship between Malcolm Tucker and his assistant. Because it's the only bit in the thick of it where you see him act in a kind of soft way. And I just wondered if you could talk about it. Because it's like this sort of only humanising element of him, where he's not doing it for...
Yes, and I think as he's being fired, she's in tears. He goes into the room and sees her crying, yes. I think that's... I mean, for example, people talk about Donald Trump, and he's had one assistant who he's had for like 30 years and is very loyal to her and you know, gets presents for her grandchildren, knows of grandchildren's birthdays and so. And you do hear about that, you know, these monsters, for some reason, maybe it's part of them saying, I've got to be human at some point, you know, some aspect of me must be good. I know, it'll be to my assistant. So, and you do hear about these people who are very, very loyal to like the Murdochs of this world and the Trumps of this world, and how they've always had that person. Sam, wasn't it Sam? So you imagine Sam and Malcolm were, you know, had been through an awful lot. So Sam probably sees herself as the only one who really understands Malcolm, you know, and feels sorry for Malcolm when they're treating Malcolm badly. But the world doesn't really get Malcolm, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that question. We're going to have to virtually end it there. Just to say, if you haven't read or bought Armando's book, Pandemonium, well worth a read. A beautiful, slim volume that packs a punch about the pandemic and the Westminster government. What's not to love? Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant questions. Thanks all for being here, and can we have another huge round of applause for Armando Iannucci?
Thank you.